I'm going to, sorry, I just had to remember to start the recording again. I had it muted paused at the moment. But I really want to thank so much Steve Grande from JMU and from Virginia Engaged for participating in this First Friday session on November 1st to talk about the journal, which was to me something that actually attracted me to Virginia when I was considering this position. So I really want as many people in the Commonwealth to be able to have access and understanding of the journal. And so this session is going to really help with that understanding. And we'll be able to share this recording on our website and in our next newsletter so many other people can have access to it. So without further ado, I'm going to let Steve take it away. Thanks, Steve.
Great. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Tayvita. I really think there's some really great things happening in Virginia, particularly around the relationship between Campus Compact of Virginia and Virginia Engage. So thanks for helping foster that. And I had to jump at the opportunity to get more involved in the journal. So we'll talk about that, and I'm looking forward to the dialogue that emerges. And I'm also really excited about who's on the call with us. So I'm just going to introduce myself and then ask other Virginia Engaged Journal folks that I asked to be here this morning to also introduce themselves too, because I'm hoping that we're all going to be sharing different parts with you, because this is definitely a collaborative kind of effort. So again, my name is Steve Grande. I'm at James Madison University, and serve as the editor with the Virginia Engaged Journal. But it's really, as I said, a team effort. And so I can talk more about myself as we go along, if that's helpful in any way. But let me ask Emily, who has played a vital role over the last year with the journal, to introduce herself, and then we'll ask Elise and Shana to introduce themselves following that. So go ahead, Emily.
Hey there, I'm Emily Cole. I'm a coordinator of community-based learning at Washington and Lee, and I've been involved assisting Steve with sort of co-editing the journal and thinking through logistics of publication for, 6 months, maybe 6 months.
Okay, it was actually like 9 months probably. But Emily has been, played a key role. There's so many little details that I think make the journal good and can make it even better. And Emily has some really great insight into that. So those will come up as we go along. But Elise, do you want to introduce yourself next, and then Shana?
Sure. Can everybody hear me? Awesome. My name is Elise Sink. I am the Director of Communications over at Madison House, which serves as a volunteer center for University of Virginia students in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Great. And I was excited to have Elise on the call, one, because of her recent publication in the journal, but then two, because of that Madison House connection as well, which even just adds more diversity to our dialogue. So, and then Shana, please.
Hi guys, can everyone hear me? Okay, my name is Shana Greenberg. I'm a senior at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. I'm studying government and psychology, and I kind of found out about the journal through my professor, Drew Stelgis, who's really involved with community engagement here at William and Mary. He was one of my professors for a summer fellowship, and it kind of prompted me to submit a manuscript from a school assignment that really turned into something more. So really excited to hear from you all today.
Great. Thanks, Shana. And Drew is also around at the founding of the journal. So multiple connections there. Well, I thought it'd be really helpful to have Emily's insights and authors. And Shana had a fascinating piece about Kaboom that we'll talk about in a little bit. But thank you, everybody, for being here today. So first, why do we have this Virginia Engaged Journal? And we'll talk a little bit more about what it is, but I think it helps just kind of like what was the vision for this thing? This idea came up. Gosh, it's been 7, 8 years ago at least is when it was first envisioned. And at the core is this idea of promoting critical reflection, and that there's multiple ways to do that, but the journal certainly serves as a vehicle to enhance critical reflection amongst students and recent graduates, but even larger than that across the Commonwealth. And I think that dovetails into another part of some of the reasoning for this journal, or the rationale, which is raising the level of dialogue in the Commonwealth about issues that matter. And this is a really neat project in the way that it does that. So it creates these connections across higher ed institutions here in the Commonwealth in a variety of ways, whether it's authors submitting pieces and then reading other articles to help prepare for their own, or it's reviewers, which are different faculty and staff across the Commonwealth reading pieces from other students from other institutions. So lots of interesting connections. And then lastly, this also creates a scholarly opportunity for students. So it really is a great launching pad to take your thinking and go further with it. So I'm excited about the journal because of what it's about and why it exists to accomplish these things. I really think it's a great vehicle to push us to do deeper reflection that's really consistent with the aims of community, civic, and democratic engagement. So, so I'm going to ask Emily to just kind of join in here and help us describe what is the journal itself. And so, Emily, I will start talking, and then and just jump in and we'll make this work. But the way the journal works is that it's an electronic journal. Right now, we publish one issue a year, and we are looking for submissions, manuscripts, and other creative works from current and recent undergraduate and graduate students, and in a few different areas that students can submit pieces. And so I might actually, maybe this might be a good time for me to share my screen with you all. Let me see if I do that successfully, just to give you, to show you the website. And yeah, so I think you all might be able to see that right now. So this is the Virginia Engaged Journal website, and hopefully you can see the URL at the top. Certainly share it afterwards if you don't have it handy. It's behind my little stop share button on my screen, but I think you might be able to see it, hopefully. So, but on this website, a good overview of the journal. It also, you can see that there's the recent articles that have been published, and you'll see Elise and you'll see Shayna's name on there. So we'll talk more about those in a moment. But there are several different areas that you can submit articles in, and so if you click on areas of emphasis, that will show you the different types of articles. So profiles of practice, reflections, reviews, and research. And so we're looking for representations in all those areas. And we can talk more about this, but I wanted to at least give you some of the flavor of what the journal is really about. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, although I need to check my notes to make sure I'm not missing anything. So I'm going to pause on the sharing for a second there. That's kind of the quick overview. I'm going to give you some examples of articles that you might see in these different categories. So a research study could be a project that a student has recently done, and maybe they actually did collect some data, or they did an institutional review board approved interview project. Elise can talk a little bit about her experience doing that. So there was a recent article that was published a couple of years ago, Justice, Democratic Inclusion, and Empowered Governance in Richmond's Development Policy. So that author gathered data on how the city of Richmond actually promoted development. And then this is a way to publish that research. So those are sometimes for some students that might feel like a bigger project, a bigger ask, but this is an avenue for publication for that. There's many students who do some kind of community engagement or service learning experience have been hopefully doing some kind of written reflection as part of that. So there's a whole category for pieces that where students can submit those pieces, and like the research category, what you write in your class might be close to the draft that you submit initially to the journal for review, but it might take some turns and iterations as it goes along, and we'll talk more about that. But reflection is a great place to publish in the journal. You'll hear from Shane in a little while about her article about the organization Kaboom. That's definitely an example of a profile of practice. There are other ones too. There was one a couple years ago, transitioning to the role of a professional physical therapist through community engagement. So an article about what's it like more on a day-to-day basis to practice, and how do I integrate my values as a into a role as a physical therapist, and how does community engagement help me understand that differently. So profiles of practice, there's a range of ways of approaching that. We're considering some of those pieces right now for the next issue of the journal. And then lastly, there are, and we don't see these as much as we'd like, but you could review a recent publication, a journal article, or a book. There are some interesting, or provide some or more just literature on a particular topic that could be helpful to the Commonwealth. So there, for instance, a student published an article, Beyond the Big House, Making the Transition to Life After Prison, as a way to help us understand what are the issues involved in kind of post-incarceration. So variety of categories to hopefully really receive the diversity of work that's being done in the Commonwealth. So we'll get into some more about next about how does this process work. But Emily, what did I miss there? What would you add as far as what the journal is and how it operates?
The only thing I wanted to add to what Steve is talking about is a little bit of an understanding of who our audience is. If you look at the Virginia Engaged Journal website, you can read our mission statement. And again, there's language about the Commonwealth and students at the undergraduate and graduate level engaging in this work. But I think in addition to those particular audiences, we're also trying to have as a readership the professionals who are, whether they identify as scholars or practitioners or both. We really want to cultivate some articles that are going to be appealing and informative for those individuals as well. And I think this is something we're about to touch on, but it's also, I think, worth mentioning throughout the editing process, the publication process. Our goal is to have the students who are submitting work really be treated not as students submitting papers for a grade, but really acknowledging that they are scholars, and this is a professional development experience. And the iterative interactions we're having with them are as much about cultivating that sense of identity in our authors, as much as we would for a working professional who's not currently pursuing a degree.
Thank you, Emily. I think that
Steve.
Yes, he's probably going to try to get back on, but maybe, do you think at this time Shana might be able to talk a little bit about your article?
Yeah, let's turn over to authors and let them share.
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
I can start. So
Hold on.
can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Oh, okay, great. So little bit of background of how I got involved with the Virginia Engaged Journal. So like I mentioned, I participated in a program through William & Mary called the DC Summer Program, Leadership and Community Engagement. Really great program, combines school credit hours with a full-time internship. And I got to be an intern in the community outreach department at Kaboom, which their tagline is the nonprofit dedicated to play. And it's a really cool organization that finds a niche need in every kid's life. Every kid needs to play. Every kid can benefit from having a safe and accessible playground. And they address that need through traditional playgrounds, fun building experiences. I know Tyvita said she has participated in a build, which is so wonderful. And then in more decentralized ways. So one of those programs is Play Everywhere, which is what I focused on in my article. And I was really inspired to write my final capstone piece, which then turned into my article about Play Everywhere, because I got to help manage a grant that was happening in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. And so I was interacting with community members, stakeholders, trying to solicit applications for the program, and hearing their design ideas for ways that they could put play into everyday spaces. So sidewalks, grocery stores, waiting rooms, places that were already being heavily trafficked by parents, but in high need areas that maybe they don't have the time or the space to have a full accessible playground. And so I thought the process of writing this article was really wonderful. It was actually written in August of 2018, and it was almost a full year until it was published in the journal. Thank you to Steve for working with me for so long, because I was studying abroad last semester in Spain, and so it wasn't super available until I got back to the US in May to finish up the editing process. And so through writing the article, I learned a lot about my own skills as a writer, how I was really able to hone what am I trying to say here? How can I take out the unnecessary, and then also use what I've learned at William and Mary, my use of databases, research in the psychology department. How could I combine my actual hands-on experience with the program and what I know about research and community development through school? So it was a really wonderful experience. I'm happy to answer specific questions, or I don't know if that's all you want, but
I'm gonna jump in just for a second. I'm sorry. I think I really appreciate that, Shayna, and I'm sorry I dropped off in the middle. So I was just happily talking along, which is that's typically what happens when I get bumped off a call like this. It's like I'm just like, boy, I think I'm talking way too long. And I realize, okay, the whole screen is frozen, and how long has it been frozen? So thanks for jumping in there. And Elise, did you already share as well? Would that make sense to go there next?
I'm happy to do so if
Great.
that's
Okay.
I guess I'll just start with a little background, as Shayna did. Um, so the piece that I worked on with Steve and with Emily is actually pulled from my master's thesis, which I did while I was at James Madison University. Um, that master's thesis was really born out of um, years of really being involved in refugee resettlement work and being very passionate about that work. Um, I guess to focus a little more on the Virginia Engage piece of it, um, my experience was very positive. Um, it was a very long research based IRB protocol heavy piece that needed to be trimmed down to something that was a little more digestible for a general audience. I think I even submitted I had culled it down to I had removed 16 pages maybe and sent Steve, and he was like, no, Elise, that's not gonna. um, but I really appreciated that he was like, I can see this specific thread through it that I need you to really track down and make a little more succinct. And so with his help, I was able to really narrow it down and really get to a main argument. Uh, and kind of whittle away what I wanted that to be in a way that was digestible to readers. It took quite a few months, which I really appreciated because iterative revision was the only way that I was going to be able to go about it. And and I definitely learned a lot through the process as well. And all of the feedback I received was really thoughtful, and it forced me to really take a hard look at what exactly I was saying, and where were my arguments coming from. So I really appreciated that as well. Is there anything else that I should touch on, Steve, or?
I'm not entirely sure where I'm going with this comment, so bear with me. I just want to point out to everyone, Elise and I were actually in graduate school simultaneously at JMU. We both have masters in writing, rhetoric, and technical communication. And I go to Elise when I need help with my editing work. And I'm only sharing this to say that I think this is a really important professional development opportunity for students. It doesn't matter where you fall on the spectrum of professional writing, everyone needs an editor. Elise's voice was concise and developed, and her arguments were clear. And yet it still, like she's saying, took months to go through this iterative process to arrive at a finished piece that was going to meet the needs of our audience and fit within the journal's scope. So I think that's a really big learning process for all of the authors who are accepted to the journal.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that, yeah, I really enjoyed the process, the back and forth with Elise and with Shana. And when Emily would bring in her perspectives into ways of strengthening arguments in articles, so the content was always there. Just, okay, how can we refine this argument? And then for an author, I think, and I'd be curious for Shana and at least what you think about this, just the process of going from something that's written to now for one audience and then changing it to a different audience can be challenging. But that's, to me, one of the beautiful things about this journal. It's like, okay, how do I make the statement to it in a different way that's more cohesive for this particular audience? And it can be tricky. It makes you think about things differently, and it tests some of perhaps the thoughts or assumptions or arguments. I don't know if that was the experience for you all, or if you could expand on that at all.
I can speak to that a little bit. So as an undergraduate, like this was really new for me. Up until now, everything I've ever written has been for a grade, has been for a professor, and oftentimes you submit an assignment and maybe you'll get one revision back, but you're not expected to resubmit it again and again and again. So you're like, you get your grade, you're happy with it, check, put it in a folder, you're done with it forever. And so this was really interesting for me to look so deeply at my own work, where I've always thought I'm a decent writer. I have a fairly good grasp over the English language, but then really having to like play the word game with the really thoughtful commentary from Steve and Emily to say, this is not working and how can we change this? And so it was incredibly helpful for me. And I've already seen now, first few months of my semester back at William and Mary, that's already having an effect on how I'm addressing school assignments once again, thinking about maybe in the future I'll look back at this paper and how will I make it easier for myself to already be coming at it from an editorial perspective and be able to be really critical of my own writing when I think I might be turning a blind eye to it. So.
I can build off of that and say, as a graduate student, I think I had the advantage of having both an undergraduate in writing and in communication, and also having become familiar with adapting to different audiences, that being part of my entire master's training. But it's still difficult. It doesn't really matter what your background is. I think it's still very challenging to always try to adapt to a different audience. I know for this piece specifically, I struggle anyway with academic audiences, because you really just want to be able to say the thing and point to that thing and say, well, it's obvious because I experienced it. But it's a lot more than just being able to point and say something bluntly and clearly. To, when you're speaking to that specific audience, there's a need to, of course, back up what you're saying with a stronger argument. And so I think that was a lot of what Steve and Emily's work was saying, okay, you have this very clear argument, but I need you to really back it up and drive the point home. And so I agree. Just writing to different audiences, it needs a strong editor. It needs a thorough process. So.
Thanks. Yeah, it's also this is really kind of fun for me right now too, because we didn't do this kind of post publication discussion, so it's fun to hear your perspectives now on the process. So we'll continue to do that. But so we've kind of alluded to the submission process, but it might help if we talk a little bit more about what's involved. And if I'm repeating something that's already been said, because I got disconnected, then stop me. And if I get disconnected again, I'm calling in. I'm not using my computer. I don't know why they're not getting along right now. But so the submission process right now, the way it's working, and I think Emily and I are going to work together to hopefully shift this as we learn new things and think about innovative ways to help the journal progress. But it's to right now we take submissions in the summer up through the end of August or early September. And those can come in a variety of formats, but we have information on the Virginia Engaged Journal website that clearly lays out, here's what we're looking for as far as submissions. So there's some pieces there, some places there, some links that will take you to preparing your manuscript for submission. And students will, their submissions, as like Elise alluded to earlier, they'll be in different kind of states. Like Lisa's was longer and needed to be shortened to make it the appropriate length for the journal. Sometimes it's some students will take something that's pretty fresh, like they used it as a class assignment, as Shana referred to, and they may make a few tweaks and then boom, submit it. And for us, we're gonna obviously receive those pieces in however they're submitted. Certainly there's some things that authors can do that can make their submission more easier to receive for us by following those directions on the website. But also when we're thinking about making them easier to digest for us, it's also what we're looking for in a piece is that does it have the potential to really reflect one of those four core areas that we talked about earlier? Does it show that there are some arguments or ideas that maybe they have been fleshed out in the article, or maybe they still need to a little bit more, but there's the potential is evidenced in the manuscript itself. Emily, what else would you add to that as far as when we're in that early stage of review, that what we're saying, okay, yes, whether this article is ready to go right now or it needs some work, but we know like it demonstrates some of that potential?
The two things that jump out right away are I'm looking for the author's voice. Sometimes students will disappear behind the citations and the argument that they're making because they're following a pretty strict rubric for an assignment. So we really want to draw out their unique perspective and opinion and voice on whatever it is they're writing about, and really encourage them to embrace their own authority on that. The other piece I would say, within service learning critical reflection, we have the really simple model of what, so what, now what. As I'm reading the majority of these pieces, I am looking for that so what and now what. We get plenty of what, but we want all of our pieces to be accessible enough to an audience, a very huge general audience that includes practitioners, scholars, people who've been doing this for years. Hopefully some students are also reading if they see something that resonates with their own interests. And it needs to be an article that has an entry point for all of those different people. It has to introduce the background and the context enough for folks who aren't familiar with the field. But it has to make enough of a claim or have enough of a call to action to keep the reader engaged. So yeah, I think that's all I would add.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that hopefully that gives you all a taste, but ask us more about that if it doesn't. But yeah, I think you summed it up beautifully there, Emily, as far as, yeah, and those don't have to be all perfect, but we're seeing at least glimpses of those things. And then we can have what's been talked about already, this iterative process, this back and forth with authors, and those are really unique depending on the author of what needs to be worked on. That's, I think, another really nice thing about the journal is that we really try to take a developmental process, so, and really personalize it to what the author needs and what can strengthen that piece. And you'll see that if you look at some of the articles on the journal. And it can be intimidating if you're a potential author, because you're seeing the finished piece, and you're not seeing all the back and forth that took place before that, as we kind of racked our brains, like, how can we get to this this final point? But still, there's a real great diversity there. I think, as Emily also said, there's diversity in these topics, which is like you're getting that sense from Elise and Shana, right? There's this incredible range. It's one of the strengths of the journals, and one of the challenges is that we have such a wide range of topics. So, but it also then demonstrates the expertise across the Commonwealth too. So every one of these articles, after it's submitted, Emily and I are going to look at it, but then we're going to, if we see that potential, then we're going to have it reviewed by 3 scholars or practitioners in the state. And so then we're bringing in reviewers from all across the Commonwealth. And so getting their input, and then we're going to digest that input and put it into a package for an author, so they have something real and helpful, hopefully, to respond to. And that's when that back and forth process really begins. So that's where and then typically an author will get that feedback. Hopefully they'll say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make some changes. And it's not, we're not dictating, here's the changes you have to make, and here's how they look. There's a back and forth on that as well. And they might say, well, here's the argument I was trying to make. Oh, okay. And so again, we want to draw out all the strengths of the article and of the author. So in this process, so then they'll submit something back, and then we're going to do some additional reviewing, and they're going to make some more edits, and there might even be one more stage after that. Sometimes it's more quick kinds of things. Sometimes there might be like one piece that we need to really tighten up. But it's because we want the journal to be high quality, and hopefully that challenge of this back and forth then really hones in on not only great arguments, but for the author, it's also a great way just to experience some more critical reflection too. Anything folks want to add to that piece? All right, well, let's, so that's a little bit about how this process works. I would like to maybe open it up to a couple of questions for Elise and Shana and Emily too, if this, some of these things we may have already talked about. So is there anything else that you'd want to talk about as far as just the process of getting published or going from a paper to a manuscript? And you've talked a little bit about both. Was there anything you want to add to that, from that, going from having a paper for a class or a thesis to having it be a submitted manuscript, and what was that process like? Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to go ahead, and I'm not sure, I can open it up to questions if everybody's okay with that.
Sure.
Or was somebody going to answer? Were you going to answer, Elise? I wasn't sure. Can you hear? Okay. So I was going to open it up to questions, but I'm going to take the first one. So as people want to ask questions, please feel free to unmute yourself, and then mute yourself when you're done. My question is, for the students who have submitted, what impact do you think the journal has had or might have on your life or career outside of the time you are in school?
I can speak to that. So I'm graduating in May, and I'm currently trying to figure out what it is that I'll be doing next. And I think what this has done for me, most of all, is show me how broad the world is when it comes to community engagement and when it comes to community outreach. Because when I was in that position at Kaboom Community Outreach, and my reach was very limited, it was a lot of office work, on the phone, that kind of stuff. But reading through the other articles that were published in this edition, at least and some of the others, like community engagement is so broad, and I think that what it boils down to is just interacting with people one on one and building connections. And so I think that's what I'm really going to pursue in the next 6 to 9 months as I'm trying to figure out what it is I want to be doing. And I know that that's really informing what kind of organizations I'm looking at, and also the process of me really digging deep into one organization. Like, I feel like I know so much about Kaboom, has given me a critical view of other organizations and their priorities, because I don't want to work for an organization that doesn't have diversity and inclusion and accessibility as their core values. And so that has really informed me from my own paper, and then just kind of taking in the work from other authors in this edition.
I could speak to the other end of that, having stepped into my current career with a nonprofit that is engaged in community engagement work. Um, I might say it's almost an opportunity for me. Well, it is an opportunity for me to re-engage with the research that I had done. I think it's very easy to undergo a large project like this in your master's, and then go, "Phew, okay, I'm done with that," and continue on into the next thing. But it is something that I remain connected with these people. These are still people that are part of my community and that I care about, and so being able to re-engage with that work, not in just this is a product that I made a couple of years ago, but this is a product that's still relevant and is still ongoing and needs to be built upon. I think this was a really good way for me to continue trying to do that, and I really appreciate the opportunity to have sort of this excellent crew of editors and folks guiding me along that process of what it could look like.
Great, thanks. Are there other questions out there? Or what other questions are out there, I should say?
I have a question for Steve and for the authors and anyone else who has thoughts on this. I'm wondering, as we're beginning another year of review, what are the factors that you think would help to set potential authors up for success? And how can Steve and I do a better job of communicating that and setting people up for success?
Actually, that actually goes back to, makes me think of a question, Emily, and that is, how do students find out about the journal in the first place? And it's almost like, there's somewhere there's an entry point, and not because they don't know about Virginia Engage, but who was on their campus. And I can guess from Shana that it was definitely, somebody like Drew. But when you talk to other authors, who on that campus actually informed, motivated, encouraged that student to take what they were doing and make it something that was publishable? So I think that's something I don't even know per se. So what has been your experience already? And maybe that's a part of the key.
I think that's right now enormous part of this is that there's a person that says, you submitted that paper for this class, or your thesis would be so great, or that project you did, that would be so great for this. So it requires that typically, because we wouldn't expect a lot of students to be aware of Virginia Engage per se, but hopefully staff and some faculty would be. So I think a lot of times it does come down to who's doing that community engagement, civic engagement on campus that has those connections to others who then will encourage students. And in my discussions with faculty, what I've sensed is that it doesn't hurt when faculty might send out an email to their class or their advisees and say, hey, here's an opportunity for publication. But I think that could be like the first thing, but that's not going to probably be enough for most folks to encourage them to submit, because it's just probably not in the awareness of most students that that's something I could do or I should do or this would benefit me. And like, what is this? It just probably doesn't actually really register that this is for me, an opportunity I could. So it requires, I think, often like an individual conversation, often about a particular project. And so I think that's the part that makes it more challenging to get those submissions. There's also some ways also to make it happen. So, faculty members being encouraged or putting announcements on their syllabus. Those are some ways that I think just start to spread awareness, and then a follow-up. It might already be like, I've heard that Virginia Engaged Journal. I've heard of that somewhere. Yeah, it's on my syllabus. But I think your piece in particular would be great for it.
Something unique for my submission process was that submission is actually built into the class that I took. And so we went into the program knowing that at the end of your final capstone paper, I'm going to select 5 to be edited, and then I'm going to work with a few of you to submit. And so I think that put in our minds the possibility from the very beginning and gave me a different perspective on writing the paper in the first place. I think that's could be really unique, especially in those like humanities classes, public policy, sociology, areas where community engagement literature is being talked about. And I think that can be really useful because I had never thought that I could get published because I don't, I'm not going through IRB review or something really formal. And so this is a really different process that when it's formally placed into the structure of a course, that could be a lot more accessible.
I'm going to bounce off of that. I'm going to say even going through IRB review, I was not expecting to get published. It was, definitely, I think by virtue of having received an email just from my master's advisor, a year out from the research itself, being like, hey, this looks like a good home for what you wrote. Having that specialized and very kind attention from someone that you respect is definitely a good motivator, especially when you have a lot of other obligations or responsibilities that are happening simultaneously. So definitely that model is working. I would say to Emily's very, very first question, ways to improve, I'm not even sure. I think I found the process to be very open, and I think what I really appreciated as well was it felt like the attention was very specialized. So every author, I'm sure, has their own challenges and their own needs, and they came to this opportunity their own way. And being able to call Steve or being able to email Emily or, kind of push back on some of the feedback or try to clarify things. That was excellent, and I really don't know what other feedback I could provide there. But that's pretty much my whole experience to both of those questions.
So that's excellent. And I think that idea too of there being a place to get these ideas out further when maybe you thought, as Shana kind of suggested earlier too, like I thought I was just done submitting the paper, but in this case it wasn't. But getting these ideas promulgated out into the Commonwealth and beyond, because we know we have submissions throughout the globe. So there's something really intriguing about that. And there's I actually didn't even know that Drew was doing that with the class, of having that written into the syllabus in that way. But I think that's definitely a strategy that Emily and I could work with faculty at other institutions on. I think that would help. We don't need thousands of submissions, but we do want to have a healthy set in each one of those categories, ideally, because of, I think, what the journal does produce. Are there other reactions, questions? What else are people thinking about?
I will say it's very interesting and unique in the sense that you do have such a wide readership. And I have had folks email me to ask questions about the piece that they read or to just provide feedback. So I don't know if students are prepared for that. I certainly was pleasantly surprised and enjoy it thoroughly. But that, that is also a really fun element of being able to get something out in the world, is to have folks actually engage with the work and be thoughtful in response. So.
One of the things that Emily and I are toying with and been talking to the editorial board about is the possibility of doing a theme journal. Sylvia Gale, who's the previous editor and did masterful work for 5 years, 5+ years on the journal, and anything I know about the journal comes either from Sylvia or Emily, I think. But but Sylvia and I have been talked a little bit about this too, about some intriguing things about a theme and also some of the challenges. But we are kind of pondering for the next cycle, which right now, if we stick with the current structure, would be in the summer of 2020. Wondering if maybe there might be some intrigue in doing that around a particular theme. And it can be something that is more Commonwealth focused. It could be more globally focused. But we've wondered about how interesting it could be to have some thread running through the submissions. And it could be, we've talked about ideas like, what if we had reflections or at least reactions or even research on this being the 400th anniversary, 2019, of enslaved Africans coming to Virginia and to what is now the United States, and as well as the beginnings of representative democracy here on this land, or at least the more formal beginnings, I guess I should say. So that would be an interesting theme potentially that we could put out a proposal to potential authors for. So that may not be the one that would really galvanize people, but we just wondered, like, wouldn't that be interesting to extend that conversation across the Commonwealth beyond this year? So I'd be curious about reactions to that or other thoughts about the journal.
I just wanted to say that I'm glad you mentioned that particular idea, Steve, because I know that aligns with programming, Taivita, that you're planning within Campus Compact. So we might have a captive audience right now of people who are vested in Campus Compact, who are curious about the Virginia Engaged Journal, and this could be a really rich opportunity for cross-pollinating.
Yes, actually, just that the consideration you're talking about made me all of a sudden start going, oh, wait, I need to, why haven't I thought about, contacting certain professors and faculty members that I've met around the Commonwealth who are doing things specifically related to 1619. Not that's the only thing, but it's definitely now like, oh, I want to be able to encourage them to consider and be cognizant of papers and work going on with students that could be potential articles for the journal. The other thing that Shana made me think of is like, to also encourage that as a possibility to be written into to the curriculum of a class, and to be able to, as I'm speaking with different faculty, to offer that idea as well and that concept, because to me that's fantastic. What an opportunity for a student who is already doing the work to kind of just really think and be thoughtful of a process that can be extrapolated across the Commonwealth and, anybody who's going to be able to touch the journal. I think that's really exciting.
That particular journal idea makes me think a lot about where I am right now in southeastern Virginia in 1619, Jamestown, Williamsburg, Yorktown. Like that was the place where all of this happened. And I think that the specific departments here at William and Mary, Africana Studies, American History, those would be really interesting people to collaborate with, but also Historic Williamsburg and Jamestown Settlement. They're always interacting with William and Mary students, whether that's for volunteering opportunities and education opportunities, but I know that there are like community relations departments through the historic triangle that are always looking to address oppression issues that are sometimes, I think, glossed over in a living history museum when you really think about what the world was like for people that didn't look like me in 1619.
Great. Yeah, I mean, just even what's great about this call, Taivita, is just be able to have this dialogue too. So this, to me, having this conversation is a form of reflection as well. So I appreciate that. And then we are kind of doing some what, so what, now what, right now, really, because we're like, yeah, where do we go? How do we take what we learned so far and move forward with the journal? So yeah, this is exciting. I'm curious, like Shane, I appreciate your reflections on that and just putting that out there. Other thoughts?
Well, I want to go ahead and thank everybody who participated in this call today. It's been an amazing education and inspiring too. So I'm like, I want to get more students to connect with this experience. So first of all, thank you so much, Steve, for leading the discussion, and thank you to Emily, Elise, and Shayna for participating and giving such a rich view of the potential of the journal. And so I'm really glad that we're going to be able to share this with others across the Commonwealth. And I just want to say thank you.
Thanks so much, Taivita, for having the leadership and inviting us to be part of this. I mean, this has been really, really helpful for me. So thank you so much. And I get to see Elise and Shayna too. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Taivita. And if anyone has questions, they should feel free to email me and Steve. Yeah, we're very open to that.
Well, when we put out the recording of the webinar, we'll make sure that we have a link to the journal and Virginia Engage, and hopefully any contacts that we can share so that people can hear this and then also be able to link right away to the resources. Okay, everyone, have a wonderful and safe weekend, and thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.